There is a photograph that tells you everything you need to know and nothing you want to believe. In it, a man stands at the edge of a stage bathed in golden light, his arms outstretched like a man who owns the entire world. The crowd is a sea of adoring faces. The marquee above him blazes his name in letters 3 feet tall. The year is 1983. He is, at that precise moment, the highest paid entertainer on planet Earth, pulling in $250,000 every single week. Every single week. He has a 40-acre estate in Las Vegas modeled after the plantation from Gone with the Wind. He has a private jet. He has a zoo. He has 100 horses. He has everything a man could dream of, stacked up so high it seems to touch the desert sky. Now close your eyes and picture him at 84, still climbing onto a stage at the Flamingo Hotel, not because he wants to, but because, as he told an interviewer with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes, he has to. Otherwise, he said quietly, I'd have to go get a job somewhere. How does the highest paid entertainer in the world end up needing to work past the age of 80 to pay the bills? How do you earn hundreds of millions of dollars and arrive at the far end of your life with the math simply not adding up? And was there a moment, one single, specific moment, when the whole magnificent, glittering structure first began to crack? His name is WayneNewton, and this is the part of his story they don't put on the marquee. He was born Carson WayneNewton on April 3, 1942, in Norfolk, Virginia, into a family that had very little except for faith, hard work, and music. His father, Patrick Newton, was an auto mechanic, a man of grease-stained hands and quiet dignity, half Powhatan Native American on his father's side, a man who worked with what he had and never complained about what he didn't. His mother, Evelyn, had Cherokee blood running through her veins and a voice that she gave to the church choir every Sunday morning, sweet and clear as a bell cutting through cold air. Between them, they made something remarkable, a boy who arrived in the world already singing, already listening, already reaching for sound the way other children reached for toys. Wayne was 6 years old when he began performing on local radio. 6 years old. Before most children have learned to read with any confidence, he was standing in front of a microphone in Roanoke, Virginia, singing country songs for whoever would tune in. He taught himself piano, then guitar, then steel guitar, then banjo. By the time he was a teenager, he would eventually master 13 instruments in total, which is not a gift. It is an obsession. It is the kind of obsession that only arrives in people who do not have a choice, who were built from the factory floor for one single purpose and have known it since they were old enough to know anything at all. He performed on Grand Ole Opry traveling shows on weekends. He sang in local clubs and county fairs alongside his older brother Jerry, the two of them a scrappy, traveling act playing for whoever would have them. Life was not glamorous. There was no easy road. The Newton family moved constantly, chasing opportunity and the right climate, Virginia to Ohio to Arizona, pulled from place to place the way working families always are, by necessity rather than by choice. And then there was the asthma. You cannot understand WayneNewton without understanding what his lungs put him through. From boyhood, his asthma was severe enough to reshape the entire trajectory of his family's existence. When he was 10 years old, his condition had deteriorated so badly that a doctor told his parents plainly, "Get him out of the cold and damp. Move him somewhere the air is dry." And so in 1952, the Newton family packed everything they had and drove to Phoenix, Arizona, because a sick little boy needed a different sky above his head. Think about that kind of childhood. The kind where your body is your enemy, where the very act of breathing is something you have to concentrate on, something that can turn on you without warning in the middle of the night. And yet this boy, this wheezing, determined, fiercely talented boy, refused to be defined by the thing that was trying to hold him down. In Phoenix, Wayne got his own radio show as a teenager. He dropped out of high school to perform full-time because the music wasn't something he did. It was something he was. And neither asthma nor poverty nor the exhausting rootlessness of his childhood had been able to take that from him. His lungs said slow down. He played louder instead. But there was a wound buried inside all of that relentless performing, a wound that the spotlight could never quite reach, and it came from the way other children treated him. WayneNewton was not, as a boy, what anyone would call conventionally masculine by the rigid standards of his era. His voice, that extraordinary, high, warm tenor, was unusual. His passion was music and horses, not roughhousing and sports. He was bullied. Badly. Persistently. The kind of bullying that doesn't fade with childhood but gets fossilized inside a person and becomes part of their architecture forever. He has spoken about it carefully over the years, always with that particular brand of dignity that people who have survived real cruelty tend to develop as armor. But the truth was stark. As a child performer, he was told he needed to bleach his hair blonde so that audiences would accept him more readily. Let that land for a moment. A child, already performing professionally, already giving everything he had to an audience every single night, being told that who he naturally was, the shade of his hair, the softness of his appearance, the pitch of his voice, was not acceptable. Not good enough. Not right. He bleached his hair. He kept performing. He never stopped. And perhaps that is the defining wound of WayneNewton's life. Not the bankruptcy that would come later, not the lawsuits, not the mob allegations, not the IRS. The wound was cut earlier and deeper than any of that. It was the wound of a boy who was told he was wrong in his very essence, and who chose, every single day, to stand on a stage and give himself to an audience anyway. That choice, that relentless, almost irrational generosity toward an audience that the world had taught him might reject him, would become both his greatest strength and, in ways that took decades to reveal themselves, one of his most costly habits. He gave and gave and gave. To audiences, to his staff, to his estate, to his horses, to his dreams. He gave with both hands and never stopped to count what was coming back. By 1958, the Newton brothers had made it to Las Vegas. Wayne was 16 years old, and the city was still raw and electric, a neon mirage in the middle of the Mojave, a place that seemed to exist outside the ordinary rules of American life. They landed a booking at the Fremont Hotel. 6 shows a day, 6 days a week. 6 shows a day? The math alone is staggering. They performed 36 times per week, week after week, refining every gesture and vocal inflection through sheer repetition until performing stopped being something Wayne did and became simply the way Wayne breathed. The hotel suits had laughed when he first proposed doing a nightly residency act midweek. Nobody came to Vegas on a Tuesday night, they said. Nobody fills a showroom on a Wednesday. The critics shook their heads. But something happened that nobody had predicted. The retirees came. The tourists on long vacations came. The couples celebrating anniversaries came. The people who didn't fit neatly into the weekend crowd came. And they came back, and they kept coming. And suddenly the Fremont's midweek showroom was the hottest ticket on Fremont Street. WayneNewton understood something that the suits with their spreadsheets had completely missed. He wasn't just selling a show. He was selling warmth. He was selling the feeling of being welcomed, genuinely welcomed, by someone on a stage who actually saw you. From his earliest days in Nevada, he had a gift for reading a room, for sensing what a particular audience on a particular night needed, and giving it to them so completely that they walked out feeling like they'd made a new friend. That gift was genuine. It was real, and it would make him one of the most beloved performers in the history of American entertainment. Then came 1962 and Jackie Gleason. Newton was performing in Phoenix when Gleason heard him sing Danny Boy. The great comedian and television host was so moved, so utterly arrested by what he heard, that he reportedly told Wayne directly, "Don't go on any other television show before you go on mine." And Wayne kept that promise. On September 29, 1962, the Newton brothers appeared on the Jackie Gleason Show, and something changed permanently that night. National television was a different universe from the hotel lounges and regional radio stations where Wayne had been building his name. This was millions of people, all at once, and he arrived on that stage and simply owned it. Over the next 2 years, he performed on Gleason's show 12 times. 12 times. And the letters poured in, and the offers multiplied, and Capitol Records came calling. And in 1963, they released Danky Shone, a warm, sweeping song of gratitude that felt like sunlight through a window, and it sold 1 million copies. It climbed to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. A year later, WayneNewton, a kid who had spent his childhood wheezing in the middle of the night and getting his hair bleached so people would accept him, was a star. He became the Flamingo Hotel's headliner at 21. He did it by walking up to the people in charge and asking for a headlining slot rather than an opening act position, which took a kind of audacity that most 21-year-olds simply don't possess. But WayneNewton had been performing since he was 6. He had already lived more stage hours than most entertainers rack up in a full career. He was not a young man trying to get lucky. He was a seasoned professional who knew exactly what he could deliver, and he was right. The years that followed were extraordinary. Daddy, Don't You Walk So Fast went gold in 1972. Summa Corporation offered him a deal worth $8 million a year to perform more than 500 shows, with another $2 million in touring revenue on top of that. By 1983, the Guinness Book of World Records had officially certified WayneNewton as the world's highest-paid entertainer, earning $250,000 every week. Think about that number. $250,000 a week. A week. He was performing for 40 million fans. A street near the Las Vegas airport was eventually named WayneNewton Boulevard, not after his death. While he was still alive and working, the city laid his name into the asphalt as a permanent monument to what he meant to it. He was not just famous. He was Las Vegas. He was the living embodiment of what that city had always promised, that a boy from nowhere, with nothing but talent and nerve and the willingness to work until his body gave out, could make himself into something the whole world would come to see. And then, October 6, 1980, he had just achieved what he considered the culmination of a dream. WayneNewton, along with gaming executive Ed Torres, had purchased the Aladdin Hotel on the Las Vegas Strip for $85 million. It was a triumphant moment. The Nevada Gaming Commission had approved the sale. Newton stood in that hearing room and talked about making the Aladdin a shining star, and he meant every word. He had competed for the hotel against a rival bidder, none other than Johnny Carson, the king of late-night television and one of the most powerful men in the American entertainment industry. Newton had won. Carson had lost. And as WayneNewton walked out of that gaming commission hearing with his lawyer, smiling, victorious, a television news crew from NBC stopped him on the street. The report that followed, anchored by investigative journalist Brian Ross, would change everything. NBC's story alleged that Newton's involvement in the Aladdin Hotel was connected to organized crime, specifically to reputed mob figures Guido Penosi and Frank Piccolo. The report strongly implied that WayneNewton, Mr. Las Vegas, America's Midnight Idol, was a front for mob money. The story aired nationally. It was seen by millions. And overnight, the warmth of the name, WayneNewton, got complicated by a shadow that he had done nothing to earn. What the report didn't say clearly enough, what it buried in implications rather than stating directly, was the actual context. Newton had indeed known Guido Penosi. He had turned to him years earlier when his family received death threats, and a man in Wayne's world had connections that could make such threats go away. Was it naive? Perhaps. Was it criminal? A federal jury eventually said no, emphatically no. But by then, the damage had been done in a way that no court verdict can ever fully undo. A man's reputation, once questioned on national television, carries that question mark forever, no matter how loudly the answer comes back clean. Newton was convinced, and spent years making his conviction public, that Johnny Carson, still furious over losing the Aladdin deal, had helped point NBC's cameras in his direction. Carson denied it. NBC denied it. But Wayne knew what he knew, and the bitterness of it ran deep. He sued NBC for defamation. A federal court initially awarded him $19.3 million in damages. But an appellate court later threw out the monetary judgment, and what had seemed like vindication dissolved back into a moral victory with no financial weight behind it. He had won, in the truest sense, and walked away with almost nothing to show for it. And then the money started to go. It is almost impossible to go broke earning $250,000 a week. Almost. WayneNewton found a way, and it was not through recklessness so much as through scale. His lifestyle had grown to match his earnings in that particular Las Vegas fashion, where the line between abundance and excess gets blurred so slowly that you never notice the crossing. Casa de Shenandoah, his 40-acre estate modeled after the Terra plantation from Gone with the Wind, sat in the Nevada desert like a monument to every dream he had ever refused to let go. There were 7 houses on the property. There was an 11,000-square-foot main residence that cost $4 million to build. There was a hospital for his horses, a private jet terminal, a heliport, tennis courts, a car museum, a zoo, a literal zoo of exotic animals that generated lawsuits when guests were bitten. There were 100 horses, each one cherished and costly. There were 70 employees, because a property like that requires a small army just to function. And there were the bad investments. The talk of the TOWN, a 2,000-seat venue he opened with Tony Orlando in 1997, seats that were supposed to be filled night after night, but regularly held only 300 or 400 people, not nearly enough to cover the $2 million lease. The venture collapsed, and with it went a friendship. "I have never given up a friendship over money," Newton said afterward, but he did. There was the Aladdin Hotel deal itself, which bled money from lawsuits and failed to deliver the returns Newton had expected, eventually leaving him tangled in financial and legal complications that dragged on for years. And there was the IRS, which has a way of arriving at the worst possible moment. In August of 1992, WayneNewton filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. He listed more than $20 million in debt. $20 million. The bankruptcy paperwork revealed a $341,000 IRS tax lien for unpaid back taxes, $8.3 million owed to Northeastern Bank of Pennsylvania, $1.2 million to General Electric Credit of Colorado, and hundreds of thousands more owed to law firms. His lawyer described it bluntly as the result of a series of bad investments in the 1980s. The man who had once earned $250,000 a week could not pay his bills. In 2005, the IRS came back. They claimed Newton and his wife owed $1.8 million in taxes and penalties from 1997 to 2000, alleging he had failed to report income, including a $200,000 Arabian horse sale, and wrongly claimed business losses on antique cars. In 2010, a former friend named O. Bruton Smith, who had loaned Newton $3.35 million, attempted to foreclose on Casa de Shenandoah when Newton failed to repay the loan. That same year, a court ordered Newton to pay $501,000 to a former pilot who had been waiting years for his wages. In 2012, lawsuits erupted over the sale of the property itself, with Newton and his family accused of failing to vacate or turn over his personal belongings for what was supposed to become a museum. There were, according to court documents, hundreds of tons of horse manure left in 6-foot-high piles around the estate. The stables, it was alleged, were so saturated with urine that breathing inside them was nearly impossible. Casa de Shenandoah, the dream he had spent decades building, the monument to a boy who was told he wasn't good enough, the physical proof that WayneNewton had made it, was listed for sale at $50 million and found no buyers. Eventually, in 2019, Smoketree LLC purchased it for just $5.56 million. That drop in value, from 50 million to 5.5, is not just a number. It is a measurement of something that cannot be fully quantified. It is the sound of a dream hitting the ground. And yet he kept performing. There is something almost defiant in the way WayneNewton responded to all of it. Not with silence, not with retreat, not with the dignified semi-retirement that a man of his stature and age might have been excused for choosing. He kept climbing onto stages. He kept opening his arms to audiences. He kept singing. In 1999, he signed with the Stardust, 6 shows a week, 40 weeks a year, until the hotel was demolished in 2006. He extended residency contracts at the Flamingo, where Bugsy's Cabaret had become his long-term home. He performed on Dancing with the Stars in 2007 at 65 years old. He had open-heart surgery in 2009 to replace a heart valve and returned to the stage months later. He made cameos on television shows. He volunteered his time for USO tours, performing for American troops overseas for decades, following in a tradition of service that he considered sacred. In 2001, he succeeded Bob Hope as chairman of the United Service Organization's Celebrity Circle. Think about what that means. Bob Hope's chair. The man who had entertained troops through every American military engagement since World War II had passed his role to WayneNewton, and Newton carried it with full understanding of the weight. Some things, he seemed to believe, mattered more than money. His personal life had its own complexity. His first marriage, to Elaine Okamura, a flight attendant whom he wed in 1968, produced a daughter named Erin, whom he adored. The marriage ended in divorce in 1985 after years of strain under the pressure of a career that demanded everything. In 1994, he married Kathleen McCrone, a lawyer from Ohio who brought stability and groundedness to his life that he had perhaps always needed. They have a daughter together, Lauren Ashley, and by all accounts Kathleen became the anchor that kept him from going completely adrift during the worst of the financial storms. He has always spoken about his family with a tenderness that catches you off guard, coming from a man with such a combustible public image. About his daughters, about his horses, about the deep, Cherokee and Powhatan-rooted sense of connection to land and animals that he inherited from his parents. He has said many times that his two great loves in life, from his earliest memories, were music and horses, and that he could never decide which he loved more. The Arabian horse breeding program at Casa da Shenandoah, called Aramis Arabians, produced more than 700 foals over generations, with 96 champions as of 2014. He sold his bicycle as a 6th grader to buy his first horse. The bicycle is long gone. The love of horses never left. There is a faith inside WayneNewton that he carries without making a great performance of it. A belief that you show up, that you serve, that you give the audience what they came for, every time, regardless of what is happening offstage, regardless of what your accountant said that morning, regardless of whether your lungs are threatening to betray you or your knees ache or the financial weight of your life has become something that would crush most people. He was given the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service in 2008. He was inducted into the Gaming Hall of Fame in 2000. A street carries his name in the city that made him. 40 million fans. 50,000 shows. 65 years of climbing onto stages and giving himself completely to rooms full of strangers who needed, for 2 hours, to feel like someone genuinely wanted them there. That is a philosophy. It may not be written down anywhere, but it is as coherent and as consistent as any scripture. You show up. You give what you have. You love what you do more than you love the money it brings, and you trust that if you keep giving, something will sustain you. Whether that philosophy has been enough to sustain WayneNewton financially is a question the numbers answer honestly. Probably not. Whether it has been enough to sustain him as a human being is a different question entirely. And now think about what his story asks of you. Because you've watched this from the outside, and maybe you've felt that familiar mixture of fascination and sympathy and something that might be judgment. The horses, the jet, the zoo, the 40-acre estate. You might be thinking that the math was always going to catch up with him, that a man who spins like that was always heading somewhere predictable. And maybe that's true. But before you settle into that comfortable conclusion, sit with this for a moment. He was 6 years old when he first stood in front of a microphone. 6. He was a boy with asthma so severe that his family uprooted their entire life to move him to a different state so he could breathe. He was a child who was told that his natural appearance, the color of his hair, the softness of his face, the pitch of his voice, needed to be altered before the world would accept him. And instead of letting that shrink him, he walked onto every stage he was ever offered and opened his arms to the crowd and gave them everything he had. The Fokker F-28 jet that once carried him across continents sat abandoned at a Michigan airport for years, covered in black mold, worth nothing. A $2 million aircraft reduced to scrap because the storage fees went unpaid. That jet is a symbol, not a failure exactly, of the distance between the life a man dreams and the life he actually lives, and the way those two things can diverge so far from each other that eventually you can't see the gap from where you're standing. But the horses remain, some of them, and the music remains. Always.